If you grew up in Britain, you probably don't need me to tell you about Charles and Camilla. You lived through it. The whispers, the tabloid front pages, the three of us in this marriage. But here's what never quite made it into the official version, the version that turned an extramarital affair into a love story, that transformed the most hated woman in Britain into Queen Consort, that quietly rearranged 4 decades of wreckage until it looked almost romantic. The part about who made it all possible. Not a spin doctor, not a sympathetic editor. A 100-year-old woman with a gin and Dubonnet in her hand, sitting in a house in Scotland, opening her front door so her grandson could cheat on his wife under her roof. Burkhall, an estate on the Balmoral grounds, the Queen Mother's favorite property on earth, and the place where Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles conducted their affair, not once, not by accident, but repeatedly, knowingly, over years, while the woman who'd spent 6 decades as the living embodiment of royal duty and moral propriety served as their landlord, their lookout, and their most powerful institutional ally. That's the story, not the affair itself. Affairs are ordinary, but the machinery that protected it, the hypocrisy that enabled it, and the century-long conspiracy of politeness that made it all possible. Start at the beginning, the real beginning. Charles met Camilla Shand in 1971. The introduction came through Lucia Santa Cruz, the daughter of the Chilean ambassador, who was a friend of both. The connection between Charles and Camilla was immediate, and by every account from people who witnessed it, built on something genuine. Shared humor, shared sensibility, a mutual love of the countryside, of horses, of the kind of quiet, landed life that Charles craved and his public role denied him. Camilla was warm where Charles was stiff, funny where he was earnest. She put him at ease in a way that almost nobody else could, and she did it without effort, without performance, without the self-consciousness that infected every other relationship the Prince of Wales attempted. There's a famous story, possibly apocryphal, but repeated so often it's become canonical, that Camilla's opening line to Charles referenced her great-grandmother, Alice Keppel, who'd been the mistress of Edward VII. "My great-grandmother was your great-great-grandfather's mistress," she allegedly said. So how about it? Whether she actually said it or not hardly matters. The point is that the relationship was, from the start, defined by an ease with royal history's messier truths that the official institution could never tolerate. Alice Keppel had been an open secret. Camilla would become one too. But Charles didn't propose. He couldn't, or wouldn't, or wasn't allowed to. The accounts vary depending on the biographer and the axe being ground. Lord Mountbatten, Charles's great-uncle and most influential mentor, reportedly advised him that a future king should sow his wild oats, but marry a young woman with no romantic past. Camilla had a romantic past. She'd been involved with Andrew Parker Bowles, a dashing officer in the household cavalry. And here's a detail that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Andrew Parker Bowles was himself connected to the Queen Mother's social circle. He was Catholic, well-connected, exactly the kind of man who moved through the same country house weekends and regimental dinners that defined the Queen Mother's world. In 1973, while Charles was at sea with the Royal Navy aboard HMS Minerva, Camilla married Andrew. The wedding was on the 4th of July, 1973, at the Guards Chapel in London. Charles was on the other side of the world. By the time he came back, the woman he'd connected with most naturally in his entire life belonged to someone else. 8 years passed. On 29th July, 1981, Charles married Lady Diana Spencer at St. Paul's Cathedral in front of 750 million television viewers worldwide. Diana was 20. Charles was 32. The Queen Mother approved. Of course she did. Diana came from the right stock, The Spencers were old aristocracy, more deeply rooted in the English peerage than the Windsors themselves. Diana was young, beautiful, apparently biddable, and, critically, she had no past that anyone could find. She was exactly the kind of bride Lord Mountbatten had prescribed and the institution demanded. What nobody asked, or nobody wanted to ask, was whether Charles was in love with her. He wasn't. Or, at the very least, whatever he felt was insufficient, conditional, already compromised by what he felt for someone else. The evidence for this is not retrospective gossip. It's contemporaneous. On the day of the engagement announcement, a reporter asked Charles and Diana if they were in love. Diana said, "Of course." Charles said, "Whatever 'in love' means." 5 words, on camera, in front of the world, and somehow the wedding still happened. The marriage deteriorated quickly. By 1986, 5 years in, Charles and Camilla had resumed their relationship. The exact date is impossible to pin down because affairs don't have ribbon-cutting ceremonies, but the convergence of biographic accounts from Jonathan Dimbleby, Penny Junor, and Tina Brown places the resumption of the physical relationship in the mid-1980s. What is certain is that by the late 1980s, the affair was an open secret within the royal household, within the Parker Bowles marriage, within Diana's daily reality, and within the upper echelons of Fleet Street. Diana knew. She knew early, and she knew specifically. In her 1995 Panorama interview with Martin Bashir, watched by 22.8 million viewers on 20th November of that year, she said the line that became the epitaph for the entire marriage. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That wasn't rhetoric. It was arithmetic. Before Panorama, there was a confrontation. At Annabelle Goldsmith's 40th birthday party in 1989, Diana approached Camilla directly. "I know what's going on between you and Charles," she said, "and I just want you to know that." Camilla reportedly responded that Diana had everything she could want: 2 beautiful children, a loving husband. "I want my husband," Diana said. The exchange was recounted by Diana herself in recordings made with her voice coach, Peter Settlin, tapes that were later aired in a Channel 4 documentary. The conversation was brief. It changed nothing. And that's when you have to ask, where was this affair actually happening? Because an affair needs infrastructure. It needs spaces. It needs people who look the other way, people who manage schedules, people who answer doors and don't ask questions. It needs, in the case of the heir to the British throne, an entire support network of discretion. Burkhall provided it. Clarence House provided it. The Queen Mother provided it. Charles's relationship with his grandmother was, by most accounts, the warmest familial bond of his life. Warmer than his relationship with his mother, certainly. Queen Elizabeth II was dutiful but emotionally remote. Warmer than his relationship with his father, Philip, which was frequently combative. The Queen Mother understood Charles in a way his parents didn't, or couldn't, or chose not to. She shared his love of Scotland, of the countryside, of tradition, and she shared something else, a willingness to privately disagree with the institutional line while publicly maintaining it. The Queen Mother's public image was a performance. Charles knew that. He'd grown up watching it. And when he needed someone inside the family who would tolerate his private life without demanding it conform to the public script, he went to the one person who'd spent 70 years running exactly that kind of double game. The Queen Mother preferred Camilla. This isn't speculation. It's documented across multiple biographies and insider accounts. Diana was too emotional, too volatile, too willing to take her unhappiness public. She gave interviews. She cooperated with Andrew Morton's devastating 1992 book, Diana, her true story. She cried on camera. She made the institution look bad. For the Queen Mother, who had spent a lifetime treating the monarchy's public image as something more sacred than any individual's feelings, Diana's behavior was unforgivable. Not the unhappiness, the visibility of it. Camilla understood the game. Camilla came from the right world. Camilla didn't make scenes. And so Camilla got Birkhall. Think about what that means, because the entire moral architecture of the Queen Mother's public life rested on one foundation: that Edward VIII's abdication in 1936 was a catastrophic act of selfish desire, that his pursuit of Wallis Simpson had betrayed the crown, destroyed her husband, and left Elizabeth to spend the rest of her life cleaning up the mess. She held this position, publicly, privately, ferociously, for 66 years. She refused to receive Wallis socially, refused to acknowledge her title, refused to permit reconciliation after Edward's death in 1972, maintained the freeze even as Wallis descended into dementia. The hatred never softened, not once, not for a single day across 6.5 decades. And the basis for that hatred? That a member of the royal family had pursued an inappropriate relationship and damaged the institution. Now apply that standard to Charles and Camilla. An heir to the throne, a married woman, an affair conducted for years, a marriage, Charles's to Diana, publicly disintegrating under the strain, the monarchy lurching toward its worst crisis since the abdication. Every element of the Wallis Simpson situation was present, every one, and the Queen Mother's response was to hand over the keys to Burkhall. The double standard isn't subtle, it's obscene. But here's the thing, the hypocrisy goes deeper than choosing sides. It poisons the entire moral framework that governed Charles's life from birth. To understand why, you need to understand how the Queen Mother processed her husband's death, because that mythology shaped everything that came after. George VI died on the 6th of February 1952 at Sandringham House. His valet, James MacDonald, found him at 7:30 in the morning. He was 56 years old. Official cause of death? Coronary thrombosis. The medical reality behind it was never ambiguous to anyone paying attention. George VI smoked 20 to 30 cigarettes a day from his teenage years. 40 years of that. By late 1948, the arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, was so advanced his doctors seriously discussed amputating his right leg. Professor James Learmonth performed a lumbar sympathectomy instead in March 1949. Not enough. May 1951. A bronchoscopy revealed a shadow on the left lung. On September 23, 1951, surgeon Clement Price Thomas removed the entire left lung at Buckingham Palace. A full pneumonectomy. The Palace Bulletin mentioned structural changes. The word cancer appeared nowhere. Last public appearance, 31st January 1952, London Airport, standing on the tarmac, thin, aged beyond his years, waving off Princess Elizabeth. 6 days later, dead. Elizabeth's version? Edward did it. The abdication killed him. She said this privately, repeatedly, to courtiers, biographers, family members, across 50 years of widowhood. Hugo Vickers documented the bitterness. William Shawcross, the authorized biographer, confirmed it in his 2009 official biography, while framing it as gently as the English language permits. She herself smoked throughout her adult life. Members of her household observed the habit across decades. She grew more discreet as public health awareness rose, but she never stopped, and she lived to 101. Her husband smoked comparably and died at 56. She attributed his death to 15 years of wearing a crown, not 40 years of tobacco. Of course, chain smoking had nothing to do with it. This mythology, Edward's guilt, the burden narrative, the sanctity of sacrifice, was the air Charles breathed growing up. It shaped who was forgiven and who wasn't. It defined duty not as a principle, but as a weapon, deployed selectively, always in service of the Queen Mother's personal preferences. Edward and Wallis were frozen out because they'd disrupted the institution through desire. Charles and Camilla disrupted the institution through desire. One couple was condemned for 66 years. The other got a house in Scotland. Then came the tape. On the 17th of January, 1993, the Daily Mirror published a transcript of a private telephone conversation between Charles and Camilla, recorded by an amateur radio scanner in 1989. The conversation was intimate, sexually explicit, and it contained a line so mortifying that it became perhaps the most quoted sentence in British tabloid history. Charles telling Camilla he wanted to be reincarnated as her tampon. Camillagate, the press called it, or Tampongate. Take your pick. The transcript ran to several pages. It was tender in places, banal in others, sexually frank throughout. It was also, unmistakably, a conversation between two people who were deeply, genuinely in love with each other. That nuance was lost entirely in the firestorm. The fallout was catastrophic. Public approval of Charles cratered. Polls suggested a majority of Britons didn't want him to become king. Camilla became the most vilified woman in the country. Eggs thrown at her car, hate mail, death threats. Andrew Parker Bowles filed for divorce. It was finalized in 1995. Charles and Diana's marriage, already a zombie institution sustained only by legal paperwork, ended in divorce on 28 August 1996. A year later, on 31st August 1997, Diana was dead. A car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. She was 36. And in the aftermath, the flowers, the grief, the public rage directed at the entire royal family, Charles was left with a problem that seemed unsolvable. The woman he loved was blamed by a significant portion of the British public for destroying the most beloved woman in the world. Marrying Camilla wasn't just politically difficult. It seemed impossible. Enter Mark Boland. Boland was hired as Charles's deputy private secretary in 1996, and he became the architect of what insiders called Operation PB. PB for Parker Bowles. His job was singular. Make Camilla acceptable. Not liked, not loved, just acceptable enough that the marriage could eventually happen without triggering a constitutional crisis. The campaign was systematic, patient, and ruthlessly professional. Boland understood that you couldn't rehabilitate Camilla overnight. The public's hostility was too deep, the Diana wound too raw. So he worked in increments, controlled leaks to sympathetic journalists, carefully staged public appearances where Camilla appeared warm, self-deprecating, unthreatening. Strategic charity work that positioned her as serious, but not competitive with Diana's memory. A slow, deliberate shift in the media narrative from homewrecker to the woman Charles always loved, which was, ironically, probably true. But truth alone wasn't going to do it. Truth needed packaging. The first major milestone came on 28 January 1999, when Charles and Camilla were photographed together leaving the Ritz Hotel in London after a 50th birthday party for Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot. The photo was not accidental. Boland had arranged for the press to be there. The couple emerged, were photographed, and the image went global. It was the first time they'd been seen in public together as a couple. The reaction was muted, not warm, but not the riot some had feared. Boland took that as a green light. What followed was years of careful calibration. Camilla began attending public events alongside Charles, charity galas, country shows, the kind of low-stakes appearances that normalized her presence without forcing a confrontation with public opinion. She met the Queen for the first time publicly at a 60th birthday party for the former King Constantine of Greece in June 2000. The meeting had been managed down to the minute. It went smoothly. Another milestone. And throughout all of this, the strategy sessions, the managed appearances, the slow warming of the press, the machinery doing the work was the same machinery that had spent a century protecting the Queen Mother's reputation. The same network of royal correspondence, the same understood rules about access and cooperation, the same editors who'd spent decades killing stories about the Queen Mother's drinking. Household sources estimated roughly 70 units of alcohol a week, 5 times the NHS recommended maximum, her £4 million overdraft at Coutts, her racism documented by her own staff. Those editors now turned their cooperative instincts toward a new project, making Camilla Parker Bowles happen. The contrast with Diana is savage. The same press corps that shielded the Queen Mother with total deference and now gently rehabilitated Camilla had hunted Diana with telephoto lenses from helicopters. The same editors who killed stories about the Queen Mother's prejudices had paid photographers to chase Diana through restaurants, beaches, hospitals. The protection was never about privacy. It was about hierarchy, about who the system decided to shield and who it decided to sacrifice. The Queen Mother sat at the top. Camilla, once Charles made clear she was non-negotiable, was brought inside the perimeter. Diana was always outside it. Some argue the Queen Mother was simply a product of her class and time. Fine. But the double standard she applied to Charles and Camilla versus Edward and Wallace had nothing to do with class norms. It was personal preference wearing the costume of principle. Wallace Simpson was frozen out for 66 years. Camilla Parker Bowles was invited to Birkhall. Same institution, same family, same type of relationship. Different verdict, issued by the same judge. The Queen Mother died on the 30 March 2002 at 101. She didn't live to see the wedding. Charles married Camilla on the 9th of April 2005 at Windsor Guildhall. A civil ceremony, not a church wedding, because the Church of England still couldn't quite accommodate the situation, even then. Camilla took the title Duchess of Cornwall rather than Princess of Wales to avoid the Diana comparison. Another piece of managed narrative, another careful calibration. On the 8th of September 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died. Charles became king. Camilla became Queen Consort. The rehabilitation was complete. The woman who'd had eggs thrown at her car, who'd been called the most hated woman in Britain, who'd been blamed for Diana's unhappiness and by emotional extension for Diana's death, was now queen. Operation PB had worked. It took 26 years, but it worked. And the machinery that made it work, the same protective apparatus that spent a century maintaining the Queen Mother's fiction, the same press relationships, the same institutional muscle, hadn't gone anywhere. It just found new people to serve. That's the thing about Charles and Camilla that nobody says plainly enough. Their story isn't really a love story, although love is in it. And it isn't really a scandal story, although scandal is too. It's a story about a system that decides which relationships are acceptable and which are catastrophic, which women are welcomed and which are destroyed, which truths become the official version and which get buried under decades of managed silence. The Queen Mother ran that system for 70 years. Charles inherited it. Camilla benefited from it. Diana was crushed by it. The affair happened at Burkhall, under the Queen Mother's roof, with the Queen Mother's knowledge and approval. The same woman who blamed Edward VIII for killing her husband, while chain-smoking her way to 101, decided that her grandson's extramarital affair was fine. Good, even. Preferable to the alternative, which was a wife who wouldn't stop making the institution look messy. Duty. Propriety. The sanctity of the crown. You knew it was nonsense. You always did. The only thing that's changed is that now, with Charles on the throne and Camilla beside him, the evidence is so overwhelming that even the machinery of politeness can't quite contain it. The fiction survived the Queen Mother. It survived Diana. It survived Camillagate and the divorce and the death in Paris and the decades of rehabilitation. But every year, more people look at the whole picture. Burkhall, the double standards, the chain smoking, the 66-year vendetta, and recognize it for what it was. Not a love story, not a scandal. A system. Still running, still deciding which version of events becomes history. Something worth remembering next time you're told a story about duty. Subscribe for more stories like this.